The fluorescent lights above Kennel 14 hummed without mercy. At the far end of the row, past the nervous retrievers and the shaking pit crosses and the old hound who had given up barking sometime on Tuesday, something waited in the back corner of a concrete cell that measured 10 feet by 10 feet and smelled of bleach and old fear. The staff called him Wrath. His intake file said Stray 119, male Dutch Shepherd, approximate age 5 to 7 years, weight approximately 34 kilograms, coat color tawny red and charcoal, condition poor, temperament severe, found by animal control officers near the Esquimalt waterfront on a Thursday morning, after 3 residents had called 911 reporting a large, aggressive dog in the alley behind a marine storage yard. It had taken 2 tranquilizer darts and a catch pole, and 1 very shaken officer named Gareth Sims, to get Stray 119 into the transport kennel. He'd shattered the pole's aluminum collar on the way in. That had been 5 days ago. Since then, nobody had managed to open his kennel door. Phil Dunmore had been running the BC SPCA Victoria Regional Centre for 11 years. He had placed fighting dogs with patient foster families. He had coaxed traumatized racing greyhounds out from beneath crates. He had been bitten twice and scratched more times than he could count, and had never once scheduled a healthy animal for euthanasia without feeling it in his chest for a week afterward. He was not a man who gave up easily, but Stray 119 was eroding something in him. He stood behind the yellow safety line painted on the floor outside Kennel 14, arms crossed, watching the dog move. Not pace, move. There was a distinction. Pacing was the broken, repetitive drift of an animal in psychological distress, the mindless back and forth of a dog that had lost itself. What Stray 119 did was different. He moved with intention. He swept the perimeter of his concrete enclosure in a tight, deliberate pattern, eyes tracking every person who passed the chain-link barrier, muscles loaded and quiet, head low. "He's not scared," said Dr. Sandra Kwan without looking up from her clipboard. She was the center's lead veterinary behaviorist with 12 years of animal behavior work behind her and a reputation for being able to read a dog the way a cardiologist reads an EKG. Fear aggression looks frantic. This isn't frantic. He's methodical. What does methodical mean in this context? Phil asked. It means he's holding a perimeter, Dr. Kwan said. He's doing exactly what he's been trained to do. He's waiting for something, or someone, and he's going to protect his position until that happens. The problem is we can't explain that to the volunteer who tried to approach him with treats on Monday. The volunteer's name was Kira. She was 17. Stray 119 had thrown himself at the chain-link gate with such force that the entire bracket had bowed outward, and Kira had sat on the floor in the hallway for 20 minutes before her hands stopped shaking. She hadn't come back. Phil rubbed the back of his neck. Gareth's shoulder. Strained. He'll be fine. But the dog caught the catch pole shaft in his jaws and nearly pulled Gareth through the gate, trying to wrench it free. He bit through the casing. She paused. Phil, I've been doing this a long time. I've never seen a dog move like this. His reaction time is, it's not normal. It's trained. The word sat between them uncomfortably. I ran his chip again this morning, Phil said. Blank. No registration. No owner records. Military chips sometimes run on encrypted frequencies, Dr. Kwan said carefully. Our scanner wouldn't read it. He's a stray. He doesn't behave like one. The growl that came from Kennel 14 was not loud. That was what made it frightening. It wasn't the bark of a distressed dog or the snarl of a cornered animal. It was low and continuous and deliberate, like an engine idling at the edge of its limit, and it moved through the air and settled in the bones of anyone standing near it. Phil looked at the dog. The dog looked back at him with eyes the color of amber held up to a winter window. Not wild, focused. I need you to draw up the paperwork, Phil said quietly. The 72-hour hold has passed. He's been given 2 extensions. I can't justify a third one, the liability alone. "I know," Dr. Kwon said. "Thursday morning, 7 o'clock." Dr. Kwon nodded and wrote something on her clipboard. Neither of them looked at the dog again. Inside Kennel 14, Stray 119 completed another circuit of his perimeter. His paws were raw from the concrete. The fluorescent light bothered him in ways he couldn't name. The sounds of the other animals were chaos to him, meaningless noise, nothing like the structured frequency of radio traffic, nothing like the low hum of a transport vehicle or the rhythmic vibration of helicopter rotors. He didn't understand this place. He didn't understand the soft-clothed people who stood outside the barrier and made sounds at him. He didn't understand the metal bowl they tried to slide under the gate or why they recoiled when he hit the fence. What he understood was simpler than all of that and older. He was holding a position. His handler had not returned. Until she did, he would hold it. He sat in the far corner, eyes on the gate, and he waited. 22 kilometers away, in a ground-floor apartment in Langford, Sabrina Hebert came awake at 5:31 in the morning to the sound of her own breathing. The nightmare was always the same. The Mali dust, fine as talcum, filling her lungs, the sharp crack of the IED ripping through the compound's east wall, the weight of her own body suddenly wrong, her left shoulder screaming, the ground rising up to meet her, and through the smoke and the shouting, and the second detonation that tore the world apart, the sight of her dog, 34 kilograms of trained Dutch shepherd, launching himself at a figure moving through the haze toward her broken body, and then disappearing into the dust as the medevac crew pulled her toward the helicopter. She had not seen him since. Sabrina sat up in the dark of her apartment and pressed both hands flat against her knees, feeling the solid resistance of bone and muscle, anchoring herself to the present. The scar along her left shoulder blade ached the way it always did in the morning, a deep and structural complaint from the shrapnel that had rearranged the architecture of her left side. She was 29 years old, and her shoulder already felt like it belonged to someone twice her age. She'd been a K9 handler with the Canadian Special Operations Regiment for 4 years. Good years by most measures, 3 rotations, 1 in Latvia, 2 in West Africa. Her dog, a Dutch shepherd with a tawny red-brown coat and a diagonal scar running from the base of his left ear to the corner of his muzzle. A wire breach incident in Gao, she had sutured it herself, had been her operational partner, and, after enough time in enough difficult places, something she didn't have a clean word for, not just a working dog. Something past that in the way that only people who had been in it would understand. His name was Rogue, military designation K9 Recon 7, officially listed in the Department of National Defense's records as status unaccounted, presumed Kaya, following the ambush in Mali's Menaka region 18 months ago. Sabrina had never once believed it. She'd spent her medical release building a case. The walls of her apartment held printed maps and email chains and a growing list of private contractors who'd worked through D&D procurement channels in West Africa, access to information requests, D&D ombudsman correspondence, working dog recovery forums. She'd looked everywhere and found nothing and kept looking. She reached for her phone. Text from Leo Damboys, sent at 3:14 a.m. Leo had been her team's signals specialist, the kind of person who survived on 4 hours of sleep and an unhealthy attachment to his laptop screen. He knew about the search. He'd been helping quietly since the beginning. The message read, "Hebert, long shot, probably nothing, but look at this before you decide it's nothing." Below it was a link, BC SPCA Victoria Regional Centre, urgent code red, euthanasia scheduled Thursday 7 a.m. Victoria, 20 minutes from her apartment. She clicked the link. The post had several photos, a sad-faced Labrador mix, 2 elderly cats, a small terrier found tied to a Canada Post box. She scrolled past all of them, and then she stopped. The photo was poor quality, taken through chain-link mesh in harsh fluorescent light. A large Dutch shepherd caught mid-lunge, front paws off the ground, jaws open, eyes blown wide. The caption, Stray Wanderer 19. Adult male Dutch shepherd, severe temperament issues, unapproachable, code red. Must exit by 7 a.m. Thursday. She almost kept scrolling. The posture was violent, the image blurry, and it was 5:30 in the morning. But she didn't keep scrolling. She pinched the image and expanded it. The fluorescent light was catching the dog's face from the right side, and there, along the line of his jaw from the base of his left ear to the corner of his muzzle, she could see it, a raised, diagonal scar, thick and pale against the darker fur, old and healed but permanent. She had closed that wound herself, kneeling on a dirt floor in a half-collapsed building in Gao, with a headlamp and a field kit, and one ear trained on the sound of sporadic gunfire 200 meters to the east. Sabrina stopped breathing for a moment. That felt much longer than it was. She looked at the clock on her nightstand, 5:47 a.m. The shelter would open at 6:30. It was Thursday. She was already moving before she finished the thought. She didn't change out of her sweatshirt. She shoved her feet into her boots without lacing them properly, grabbed her keys and her wallet, and the old olive-green lead she'd kept in the front pocket of her go-bag since the night she'd been medivaced out of Menaka, the same lead she'd clipped onto Rogue's collar every single operational day for 4 years, and she went out the door. The drive to Victoria in the pre-dawn dark took 19 minutes. She didn't remember most of it. Her mind kept cycling through the same loop. How did a Canadian Forces military working dog end up in a BC SPCA kennel in Victoria? Had someone moved him through a contractor channel after the ambush? Had he been sold to a private security firm the way some MWDs disappeared after operations? Had he escaped? Had he been abandoned? The Esquimalt waterfront, the marine storage yards, CFB Esquimalt, was 2 kilometers from there. Someone had brought him to Victoria and then let go of him, or lost him, or been forced to abandon him. None of it mattered. What mattered was the clock on her dashboard. 6:14 a.m. when she pulled into the BC SPCA car park on Napier Lane. The facility had just unlocked its front doors. Sabrina was through them before the receptionist had set down her coffee. "I need to go to the kennels," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. "Kennel 14, the Dutch shepherd on the code red list." The receptionist stood up, alarmed. "Ma'am, we're not open yet for." "I know what time it is." Sabrina was already past the desk. "Where is your director?" Phil Dunmore appeared from a side hallway, drawn by the noise. Broad-shouldered 50s, with the measured composure of someone who'd spent a decade managing crises that didn't follow appointment schedules. "I'm the director. Can I help you?" "Stray Wanderer 19, Sabrina said. "The Dutch shepherd. You have him listed for euthanasia at 7 o'clock. "That's correct," Phil said carefully. "He's been assessed as a severe public safety risk. We've given him." "He's not a stray." The words came out flat and certain, the way a compass points north. "His name is Rogue. He's a military working dog with the Canadian Special Operations Regiment, K9 designation Recon 7. His chip runs on a D&D encrypted frequency. Your scanner can't read it. I was his handler." Phil looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the old olive-green lead she was holding, worn to the texture of soft leather at the clip end, the kind of wear that only came from years of daily use. "Ma'am, even if what you're saying is accurate." From the far end of the building came the sound of systematic crashing, heavy, rhythmic, determined. The sound of something large and strong throwing itself against a steel gate at measured intervals, not frantically, not randomly, but with the focused patience of an animal executing a protocol. Sabrina was already moving toward it. Phil followed, calling after her, and behind him came Gareth Sims, with his arm still in a partial support wrap, and Dr. Kwan, who had been drawing up the sedative in her office when she'd heard the commotion in the lobby. They reached the kennel corridor in a cluster, just as Sabrina pushed through the double doors. The barking of 30 other dogs was deafening, but underneath it all, from Kennel 14 at the corridor's far end, came the steady mechanical impact, measured, deliberate, like someone testing a locked door again and again with patience rather than desperation. Dr. Kwon had the pole syringe in her hand, and she was 3 steps from the kennel gate when Sabrina came around her and placed herself between the veterinarian and the fence. "Don't," Sabrina said. "Stand back," Dr. Kwon said sharply. "That animal will." The dog hit the gate again, the chain link bowed outward, the metal brackets groaning. Stray 119 landed back on all 4 feet and immediately reassembled, jaws parted, body coiled, eyes on the new arrival. He did not lunge again. Something in his posture shifted by a fraction. The rigid set of his shoulders changed, infinitesimal, but there. Sabrina didn't step back. She moved forward until she was a foot from the gate, and went down to one knee, lowering herself to his eye level, and she did something that made every person in the corridor stop breathing. She pressed her forehead lightly against the cold chain link. "Don't do that," Gareth said, his voice thin. "Please don't do that." Sabrina ignored him. She looked at the dog through the mesh, the amber eyes, the diagonal scar along his jaw, the raw front paws, the way his weight sat slightly to his right side, favoring the old shrapnel injury in his left hip that she had managed with anti-inflammatories and careful rest in the field for 6 months before the ambush. She let out one slow, even breath. She let herself become still, not passive, but present, grounded, the kind of stillness that communicates a particular message without any words at all. Then she spoke. One word, soft as breath, in the particular way she had always said it, dropping slightly at the end, the Acadian French of her grandmother's kitchen in Caraquet, coloring her vowels even now after years of trying to train it out of her operational voice. Phew. The kennel corridor was silent. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then stray 119, K9 Recon 7, military working dog, missing in action for 18 months, survivor of a West African ambush and captivity and cargo holds and 11 days on the streets of Victoria, stopped. He lowered his head. The hackles along his spine, raised continuously for 5 days, settled flat against his tawny coat one by one, like a flag coming down in slow degrees. His jaws closed. "Feu," Sabrina said, again her voice barely holding. "C'est moi, je suis là, stand down." She switched to Dutch from habit, from 1,000 early mornings, and 1,000 operational briefings, and 4 years of building a language only 2 of them shared. Zit. He sat. Not slowly, not reluctantly. He dropped his hindquarters to the concrete with the immediate, precise compliance of a dog who has never once questioned a command from this particular voice, because this particular voice had always, without exception, meant safety. Phil Dunmore said very quietly, "My God." Dr. Kwon lowered the pole syringe. Her hand was shaking. She stared at the dog sitting with perfect posture in the center of the kennel, and then at the woman kneeling in front of the gate, and said, "He was completely unreachable. 5 days. We couldn't slide a food bowl under the gate." Sabrina reached into the front pocket of her sweatshirt and pulled out the olive green lead. She held the brass clip up against the mesh. Rogue made a sound that undid every person in the corridor who heard it. Not a bark, not a growl. A high, warbling whine, the sound a dog makes only in the extremity of longing, and he pushed his scarred muzzle against the chain link and tried to press through it, his whole body trembling. "Open the gate," Sabrina said. Phil looked at Dr. Kwon. Dr. Kwon nodded, her expression something past professional composure. "Let her in." With hands that weren't entirely steady, Phil Dunmore drew the steel bolt back and swung the gate open. Sabrina Hebert walked into Kennel 14. Rogue did not leap, he did not bite. He dropped his belly to the concrete and army crawled toward her, tail tucked, whole body shaking, whimpering in a continuous and broken way that was nothing like the sound he had made all week. When he reached her boots, he pressed his muzzle against her shin and stayed there, and Sabrina went down to both knees on the bleach-smelling concrete and got her arms around him and held on. She ran her hands over his ribs, too prominent, too close to the surface, and over the new scars she didn't recognize yet, and the old ones she knew by heart. She pressed her face into the coarse fur of his neck, and she shook. "I've got you," she said. Her voice had come apart completely. "I've got you, I'm here, we're going home." Rogue pressed back against her with his full weight and let out a long, shuddering breath. The sound of something finally releasing. He closed his eyes and put his head against her left shoulder, the damaged one, the one he had always chosen when she was tired, because somehow he had always known, and he was still. The administrative aftermath took 3 hours. Phil Dunmore gave them his office. Rogue lay with his head across Sabrina's thighs on the narrow vinyl couch and didn't move except to track the door with his ears every time someone passed, settling again at the touch of her hand. A priority call to national defense, placed at 7:04 a.m. After the scheduled euthanasia time had come and gone without event, confirmed Sabrina's identification within 40 minutes. A military liaison from CFB Esquimalt, a composed man named Commander Thomas Erard, drove to the facility at 9:30 with a DND-issued scanner and clearances that turned Phil Dunmore slightly pale when he read them. The chip read clean: K9 Recon 7, assigned handler, Corporal Sabrina Hebert, Canadian Special Operations Regiment, medically released 2024. Status, as of this morning, formally updated from unaccounted, presumed KIA, to located, civilian custody pending release. Commander Erard sat across from Sabrina in the small office and explained, with the clipped economy of someone reading from a classified brief, what they had been able to piece together. After the Menaka ambush, Rogue had survived the secondary blast. He had been picked up by a local armed faction who passed him to a private security contractor operating through a DND-adjacent procurement channel, a firm based on Vancouver Island with offshore operations in the Sahel region. The contractor had tried to retrain him for private use. The dog had been, by all accounts, completely unmanageable. He had been shipped back to Canada as undeclared cargo and abandoned at the marine storage facility near CFB Esquimalt when RCMP investigators began looking into the contractor's other activities. He'd been surviving near the waterfront for approximately 11 days before Animal Control picked him up, Commander Erard said. In that environment, with no handler contact, no familiar operational structure, his condition on intake is remarkable. He was holding his post, Sabrina said. The commander looked at her. That's what he was doing, she said quietly, waiting for me to come back, protecting his position until I did. That's what he's trained to do. That's all he was ever doing. There was a silence in the office. Phil Dunmore cleared his throat. I owe you an apology, he said, looking at the dog. If we had known what he was. You couldn't have known, Sabrina said. She meant it fully. He was trained to be exactly what he looked like to you. He was doing his job correctly. The failure wasn't here. Dr. Kwon appeared in the doorway. She looked at Rogue for a moment. He opened one amber eye, assessed her, and closed it again, and then at Sabrina. He's going to need significant care, she said. Shrapnel migration near the left hip that will need imaging and likely surgery. Severe malnourishment, 2 fractured teeth from trying to breach the isolation fencing. And the psychological components. That's going to take time. A lot of it. Sabrina clipped the olive green lead onto Rogue's collar. He raised his head immediately, alert, reading her intent the way he always had. She looked up at Dr. Kwon. We have nothing but time, she said. The walk down the main corridor of the BC SPCA Victoria Regional Centre was not something Phil Dunmore would easily forget. Word had spread through the facility the way it always did, in a building full of people who cared deeply about what happened to animals, quickly and with significant emotional weight. By the time Sabrina and Rogue emerged from the office, the corridor had filled with the quiet presence of staff and volunteers who had arranged themselves along the walls. The vet technicians, the morning kennel staff, 2 volunteers, and young Kira, who had been so frightened by this dog 3 days ago that she'd sat on the corridor floor until her legs stopped shaking. Nobody applauded, nobody said anything, they simply stood. Gareth Sims stood near the end of the row with his good hand clasped behind his back and his chin up. His expression was something that hadn't quite decided yet whether it was going to be embarrassment or respect, and it settled somewhere quietly between the two. Sabrina walked with the slight hitch in her left shoulder that she'd had since Marley, her unlaced boots quiet on the linoleum beside her. Rogue moved, not the frantic pacing of 5 days in an isolation kennel, not the coiled spring vigilance of a dog holding a perimeter against an incomprehensible world. He walked with his head up and his amber eyes fixed on the glass doors at the far end of the corridor, and his gait carried the composed and deliberate quality of a working dog who has completed his assignment and knows it, battered, underweight, scarred in ways both visible and not, but his bearing was entirely his own. Kira watched him pass. Her hand was pressed over her mouth. She was crying without sound, and her eyes held the particular expression of someone who has just understood something they didn't have the words for yet, the difference between a dangerous animal and a trained soldier who had simply been waiting for the right person to come through the door. In the lobby, Phil Dunmore was waiting by the reception desk. Sabrina paused. "Thank you," she said, "for the extensions, for not moving faster than you did." Phil looked at the dog and then at her. "Thank you for getting here in time," he said. He paused. "Take good care of him." "We'll take care of each other," Sabrina said. She gave a single nod and pushed the glass door open with her right hand, her left hand steady on the lead. The morning had come all the way up while they'd been inside. The October sun over Victoria was thin and pale and brilliant, the way Pacific Coast autumn always was, the kind of light that made everything look recently washed. In the distance, across the low rooftops, the harbour caught it and turned silver. Sabrina stood in it for a moment with her eyes closed. Beside her, without being asked, Rogue sat. He pressed his shoulder against her knee and turned his face up toward the light. She opened the truck door. He jumped in cleanly, the old movement, entirely familiar, and curled up on her jacket on the passenger seat, his nose tucking under the hem the way it had in every vehicle they had ever shared. She stood with her hand on the open door for a moment, looked at him, the diagonal scar along his jaw, the amber eye watching her with total and absolute trust the way it always had. She got in. She closed the door. She sat with her right hand resting gently on his side, feeling the steady rise and fall of his ribs beneath her palm. Slow and even, the breathing of a dog who has finally, completely, stood down. The road ahead was not going to be simple. There would be surgical consultations and rehabilitation schedules, and nights when the old nightmares didn't respect the boundaries of a warm apartment in Langford. There would be mornings when the shoulder was bad, and evenings when the thing that couldn't be named came back for both of them in ways that no one who hadn't been in that dust could fully understand. Trust took time to rebuild. Bodies didn't heal the way they used to. But Sabrina Hobert turned the key in the ignition, and the engine caught, and Rogue shifted slightly on the seat and exhaled, long and slow, the sound of a soldier finally laying down his watch, and she understood, in that quiet moment in a BC SPCA parking lot on a Thursday morning in October, that she had not simply been searching for a dog. She had been searching for the version of herself that still existed in his memory, the one who had not come home diminished, the one who still knew exactly who she was, and why it mattered. She'd found him. He'd found her back. She put the truck in gear and drove them both home.